Hey, my name is Levi Shaw. I'm 33 years old, and I'm the large animal vet in a ranching town called Sweetwater, where the cattle outnumber the people about 40 to 1 and everybody's got an opinion about everybody. I'll give you the moment first, because it's the moment everything else turns on. I'd known Jo Calder about 4 months the day I made the joke that changed my whole life. She'd just run a cattle buyer clean off her property, a man twice her size who'd tried to lowball her and then made the mistake of calling her sweetheart, and she'd done it with language I won't repeat in mixed company. He peeled out of her drive in a cloud of dust, and I stood there in the corral half laughing and said, "You know, Jo, you're gonna scare off every guy in town." She didn't laugh. She turned and looked at me, dead level, those gray eyes steady as a fence post, and she said, "Good, I only want one. And I want you to understand, it took me a full 5 seconds, standing there like a fool with a stethoscope around my neck, to realize she was looking right at me when she said it. Let me back up. I came to Sweetwater 2 years ago to start over. I'd trained back east, apprenticed under a crusty old veterinarian named Doc Hubbard who'd forgotten more about animals than most men ever learn. And then I'd done 4 years at a fancy practice in a city where I made good money and felt like a stranger in my own life. I left because of a woman, mostly. Her name was Brooke, and we were engaged, and 3 weeks before the wedding she sat me down and told me the truth as she saw it. "You're too soft, Levi," she said. "You let everyone walk over you. You'd rather be kind than be right. A woman wants a man who takes charge, and you just aren't that. I'm sorry, I can't marry a pushover." She gave back the ring and married a loud man in finance within the year, and I told myself she was probably right. I packed up everything I owned and drove until the buildings ran out and the sky got big, and I landed in Sweetwater, where the old vet was retiring and nobody knew me as the soft man who'd been left. I figured I'd just be good at my job and keep to myself and not need anybody. That was the plan. Doc Hubbard had given me one thing I carried with me, though, the most important thing he ever taught me, and he taught it to me over a horse. I was a green vet student, and we'd been called to a stallion that nobody could handle. A big, mean, dangerous animal that had already put one man in the hospital. The owner wanted it gelded or shot. I went in there all confidence, ropes and restraints, ready to force the issue, and the horse nearly took my head off. Doc Hubbard pulled me out of that stall by my collar and sat me down in the dirt and said something I've never forgotten. "Levi, the meanest animal in any barn is almost always the one that's hurting the worst, or scared the worst, or been hurt by people the most. You don't fix a frightened thing with force. Force is what made it that way. You don't break it, son. You earn it. You go slow, you stay calm, you let it learn you're not one more thing that's going to hurt it. Takes longer. But it's the only thing that ever actually works, on a horse or on a person." We spent 3 weeks on that stallion. 3 weeks of me sitting in that stall doing nothing but being calm and present and unthreatening, until one day the meanest horse in the county walked over and put his head against my chest. I gentled him. Nobody had to shoot anything. I didn't know it when I drove into Sweetwater, but I'd brought that lesson to exactly the place it was meant for. Because Sweetwater had its own meanest creature in the barn, and her name was Jo Calder. I heard about Jo before I ever met her. You couldn't be in town a week without hearing about Jo Calder. The men at the feed store lowered their voices when they talked about her, half admiration and half fear. Runs the whole Calder spread by herself. Has since her daddy dropped dead when she was 22. Hard as a hammer, that one. Cussed out the bank president to his face. Pretty enough, I guess, if you like the type that'd sooner shoot you than dance with you. No man'll ever get near that one. She's scared off every fella in 3 counties. I didn't think much about it. Then, my 3rd week in town, I got a call at 2 in the morning. A cow, down in a hard labor out at the Calder Ranch, and the old vet gone, and a new one they'd never met. I drove out under a sky full of stars to a big, well-kept spread, and I met Jo Calder in a birthing stall with blood up to her elbows and exhaustion in her face, fighting to save a heifer and a calf that both should have been dead already. "You the new vet?" she said, not looking up. "You're late. Wash up and get in here, and if you tell me to step back and let the men handle it, I'll throw you out on your ear myself." "Wasn't going to," I said. I scrubbed in and knelt down beside her in the straw. "Looks like a posterior presentation." "You've been repositioning him?" She glanced at me, surprised I'd known. "For an hour. He won't turn. Then let's turn him together, I said. You've got the better angle. I'll follow your lead. I think that was the first time anyone had said that to Joe Calder in a long while. I'll follow your lead. Something flickered across her face, and then we got to work, the two of us, in the cold and the blood and the straw, and after 40 minutes a live calf slid out into my hands, and Joe let out a breath that shook at the end of it, and for 1 second before the armor came back up, I saw exactly who she was under all of it. She was tender, she was tired down to her bones, and she was so used to fighting the whole world alone that someone simply working beside her had nearly undone her. Then the second passed, and she stood up and wiped her hands and said, gruff as ever, "Bill me fair and don't pat it. I checked the math." And I knew right then, the way Doc Hubbard had taught me to know, the meanest creature in the barn is the one that's been hurt the worst. I started finding reasons to be out at the Calder Ranch. That's the honest truth of it. Cattle and horses get sick, and Joe ran a big operation, so there was always a legitimate call. But I'll admit I never minded those calls, and I was quicker to drive out there than anywhere else in the county. And over those months, a strange thing happened. The same slow thing that had happened with Doc Hubbard's stallion. Joe Calder started to learn me. She tested me constantly at first. She was blunt to the point of cruelty, daring me to flinch. She'd bark orders to see if I'd bristle. She'd dismiss my opinion to see if I'd puff up and fight her for dominance the way every other man did. I never did. I just stayed calm, did good work, told her the truth when I disagreed without making it a battle, and treated her like exactly what she was, the smartest, most capable rancher in the county who happened to be carrying more weight alone than any one person should. "Why aren't you scared of me?" she asked me once, point blank, while we vaccinated a string of yearlings. "Everybody's scared of me. It's useful, keeps the fools away, but you're not, and I can't figure why." "I trained on a stallion meaner than you," I said. "He had his reasons too." She barked a laugh, a real one, surprised out of her, and then looked annoyed that she'd done it. "Did you?" she said. "His owner wanted to shoot him. Everybody'd handled him with ropes and whips his whole life, so he'd decided the whole world was a thing to fight." I ran my hand down a yearling's neck. Turned out he was just in pain nobody'd bothered to look for. Soon as somebody quit trying to break him and just earned him, he was the gentlest horse on the place. Joe was quiet for a moment. "You comparing me to a horse, Doc?" "I'm saying I've met a few things the world gave up on too early," I said. "I tend to think they're worth the time." She didn't answer that, but she didn't throw me off the property either, and that was its own kind of answer. The night that changed things came at the end of that summer. A dry lightning storm rolled through and put a strike in the old hay barn on the back 40. And by the time anyone saw the glow, it was going up like a torch with a dozen horses trapped in the attached stalls. I heard the call on the radio and drove out with my heart in my throat, and I came over the rise to a scene out of a nightmare. Fire lighting up the whole sky, and Joe Calder running straight into it. She had 3 horses out already and was going back for more, alone. Her foreman Earl, too old to do much but hold the ones she'd freed. I didn't stop to think. I tied a wet bandana over my face and went in after her, and for 20 minutes the two of us worked that burning barn in the smoke and the screaming and the heat, blindfolding panicked horses with our own shirts so they'd follow us out, one at a time, until every last animal was clear and the roof came down behind us in a roar of sparks. We collapsed in the dirt a safe distance off, both of us black with soot, lungs raw, watching 40 years of her father's barn burn to the ground, and Joe Calder, who hadn't cried in front of another living soul since the day they buried Big Tom Calder, put her sooty face in her hands and broke. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell her it'd be okay, or that it was just a barn, or any of the useless things people say. I just moved over beside her in the dirt and put my arm around her shoulders, and I let her cry against me while the fire died down, the way you'd sit with a frightened animal and let it learn you weren't going to hurt it. After a long while she went still. She didn't pull away. "Don't tell anybody you saw that," she said, hoarse from the smoke. "Saw what?" I said. She let out something between a laugh and a sob, and she leaned her head against my shoulder for 1 moment longer before the armor came back, and I understood that I'd just been let further inside the walls of Joe Calder than anyone had been in 9 years. We rebuilt that barn together over the fall, board by board. I came out on my days off and swung a hammer beside her, and we didn't talk much, and it was some of the happiest work I've ever done. I should tell you about Wade Garrison, because he's the reason the whole thing nearly didn't happen. Wade owned the ranch that bordered Joe's to the north, a big outfit, bigger than hers, and he'd been after the Calder land for years, because Joe's spread held the water rights to the creek that fed both their operations. Wade had figured out a long time ago that the cheapest way to get that water wasn't to buy the ranch, it was to marry it. So Wade Garrison courted Joe Calder. Loudly, publicly, the way a man courts when he wants the whole town to assume an outcome. He brought her cattle deals and dinner invitations and a big confident smile, and he told everyone in the feed store that he and Joe were practically settled, and the whole county nodded like it was a done thing. The two big ranches, joined, water and land all tidy. It made sense to everyone. I saw him work her up close exactly once. I was out at the ranch splinting a calf's leg when Wade rolled in, all teeth and handshake, and stood too close to Joe by the corral fence laying out his vision. The two spreads run as one, her father's land finally getting the management it deserves, his words. Like 9 years of her keeping it alive hadn't happened. He talked over her twice. He put his hand on the small of her back and she stepped out from under it so smoothly he never even registered the insult. When his truck finally rumbled off, Joe stood looking after it with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not anger, tiredness. Bone-deep tiredness. He doesn't see me at all, she said, more to herself than to me. 9 years, and not one of them has ever once looked at this ranch and seen the person who saved it. They look at it and see what they could do with it if I just get out of the way. She caught herself, and the armor snapped shut. Hand me that iodine, Doc. We've got work. But I'd heard it. The loneliest sentence I'd ever heard a person say, dressed up as a complaint about a neighbor. It made sense to everyone except Joe, who saw exactly what Wade was after, and who'd spent 9 years watching men size up her land instead of her face. And it made me sick, frankly, watching him work her like a business deal, though I had no right to feel anything about it, and I told myself so most nights. Which brings me back to the corral, and the cattle buyer, and the joke. It was a bright, cold afternoon, and I was out at the Calder place, looking at a lame gelding, when a cattle buyer rolled in to try Joe on a deal. I watched the whole thing. He lowballed her on a string of steers, and when she held firm, he got that tone men get, the patient, condescending tone, and he called her sweetheart and suggested she ought to have a man look the numbers over. Joe Calder ran him off her property in about 90 seconds flat, and it was a thing of beauty, and as his truck disappeared down the drive, I laughed and said the thing. You know, Joe, you're gonna scare off every guy in town. Good, she said. I only want one. 5 seconds. That's how long I stood there before I understood. And then my heart started going like I'd run a mile. And I looked at her, and she was looking right back at me, chin up, daring me the way she dared everyone. Except this time, her eyes weren't hard. They were terrified. Joe Calder, who wasn't scared of bankers or buyers or bulls, was standing in her own corral scared half to death because she'd just said the truest thing she'd ever said out loud. And I, God forgive me, I panicked. Because all I could hear in that moment was Brooke's voice. You're too soft, Levi. A pushover. A woman wants a man who takes charge. And here was the strongest woman I'd ever met. A woman who'd run a ranch alone for 9 years. A woman who scared grown men, telling me she wanted me. Soft, quiet, pushover me. And the only thing my broken heart could think was she'll figure out what I am and she'll leave too. And this one will hurt worse than all of them. Joe, I said, you don't want me. Trust me. I'm not what a woman like you needs. I'm not a strong man. The last woman I was with left me 3 weeks before our wedding because I'm too soft, too much of a pushover, and you need somebody who can match you, and that's not— Stop, Joe said. I stopped. She walked across that corral until she was standing right in front of me, close enough that I could see the chapped windburn on her cheeks and the gray of her eyes. You listen to me, Levi Shaw, she said, low and fierce. I have spent 9 years being handled. Every man who's ever come at me came at me with force, trying to break me or buy me or out-tough me or take what I've got. Wade Garrison wants my water. The bank wants me to fail so they can sell my daddy's land. Every fool in this county wants me to be softer, smaller, easier, to quit and let a man take over. Her voice cracked, just once. And then a vet shows up in the middle of the night and kneels down in the blood and the straw and says, "I'll follow your lead. You're the only man in my entire life who never once tried to break me. You just earned me, slow, like I was worth the time." A tear ran down through the windburn, and she didn't wipe it. "You think your softness is what makes you not enough. It's the only thing that ever reached me. Don't you dare stand there and call the best thing about you a weakness." I couldn't speak. Everything Brooke had told me was wrong. Every story I'd carried about myself for 2 years was coming apart in a corral in front of a woman with blood under her nails. "That ex of yours wanted a man who takes charge," Joe said. "I run a 1,000-acre ranch by myself. The last thing on God's earth I need is somebody else trying to take charge of me." She took a breath. "I need a partner. I need the one man who looked at the meanest thing in the county and decided I was worth gentling instead of breaking. I only want one, Levi. I've only wanted one for months. The question is whether you're too scared of an old ghost to want me back." "I'm not scared," I said. My voice came out wrecked. "I'm not scared, Joe. I just didn't believe somebody like you could want somebody like me." "Well," she said, "believe it. I'm not in the habit of repeating myself." And then Joe Calder, who scared off every guy in 3 counties, grabbed the front of my coat and kissed me in the middle of her corral, and I stopped arguing with the best thing that ever happened to me. We didn't get a fairy tale right away. We got a fight first, because that's how the real ones go. Wade Garrison did not take kindly to losing. When it got around town that Joe Calder was stepping out with the new vet, and in a town like Sweetwater, everything gets around by Tuesday, Wade dropped the charming act and showed his hand. He'd quietly bought up an old loan against the Calder Ranch from the bank, a note Joe's father had taken years back, and he called it "demanded payment in full, all at once," an amount he knew Joe couldn't put her hands on in the time he gave her. It was a move designed to take the land the marriage hadn't gotten him. The whole town held its breath. Most folks figured Joe Calder was finally beat. She came close to breaking that week. I watched it. The one thing that could get through her armor where no man ever had was the thought of losing her father's land, the thing she'd bled for 9 years to keep. She sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the papers spread out, running the same arithmetic over and over, and for the first time since I'd known her, Joe Calder looked like she might give up. And here's where I learned what I was actually made of. The thing Brooke never saw. The thing Joe had seen from the first night. I didn't try to take charge. I didn't ride in to rescue her and take the reins, because she didn't need a man to take over. That was the whole point. Instead, I sat down across the table from her, and I said, "I'll follow your lead. Same as the first night. What do you need?" And then I did the quiet, unglamorous, soft thing. I emptied my savings, the city money I'd never cared about, into the pot. I called Doc Hubbard, who knew everybody, and we found a fair lender to refinance the note out from under Wade before his deadline. I drove 3 counties rounding up the cattlemen who respected Joe to buy her steers at honest prices. Fast, for cash. I didn't fix it for her. I helped her fix it, beside her, following her lead, the way you earn a frightened thing instead of breaking it. We beat Wade Garrison's deadline by a day and a half. He got neither the land, nor the water, nor the woman, and he sold out and left the county within the year, and nobody missed him. Joe kept her father's ranch, and the night the refinance cleared, she stood on her porch looking out at the land she'd nearly lost, and she said, without turning around, "You know you didn't have to do that. Empty your whole savings for a woman's mortgage. Most men would have called that my problem. I didn't do it for a woman's mortgage," I said. "I did it for my partner. You'd have done the same for me." "I would have," she said, and then quieter. "Nobody's ever stood beside me before, Levi. They always stand in front, trying to lead, or behind, waiting for me to fail. You're the first one who just stood beside me. I'm planning to keep doing it," I said, "if you'll have me." She turned around then. "Is that a proposal, Doc? Because if it is, it's the worst one I ever heard." "It's the first half of one," I said. I was working up to the rest. "Don't work up to it," Joe said. "I told you, I don't repeat myself, and I'm not a patient woman. I only want one. I found him. Ask me." So I asked her, standing on the porch of the ranch she'd saved, and Joe Calder, hard as a hammer, mean as a wet cat, the woman who scared off every guy in 3 counties, said yes before I'd even finished the question, and then got mad at herself for tearing up, and I loved her so much in that moment I could barely stand it. We were married that spring in the big pasture down by the creek, the contested water running bright beside us, the whole town there to see the thing nobody had believed could happen. Doc Hubbard drove out for it and stood up as my best man, and during the toast he told the story of the meanest stallion in the county and how I gentled it, and only Joe and I knew he wasn't only talking about a horse. She didn't wear white, she wore her mother's dress, which she said her mother would have wanted, and she cried twice and denied it both times. It's been 3 years now. We run the Calder Ranch together. It's the Calder Shaw spread now, on the sign. Her name first because she earned it first, and I won that argument by losing it on purpose. I still do my vet rounds across the county, and she still runs the operation with an iron hand, and she still scares the daylights out of every cattle buyer who underestimates her, which never stops being the most attractive thing I've ever seen. We've got a daughter now. She's 2, and God help the world, she's already got her mother's chin and her mother's glare, and I wouldn't change one hair on her fierce little head. Last month a new cattle buyer came through, didn't know who he was dealing with, and made the mistake of asking me, the vet, whether the little lady was authorized to sign off on a sale. I told him she owned the place, and I just worked here, and I watched Joe take him apart over the next 10 minutes with the calm precision of a woman field dressing a deer. When he'd gone, white-faced, she turned to me and said, "You're smiling again." "I married the scariest woman in 3 counties, I said. "I'm allowed to enjoy it." "You're a strange man, Levi Shaw." "You only wanted one," I said. "You don't get to complain about the one you got." She kissed me then, in front of the corral and Earl and our daughter on her hip, and Earl looked away grinning, because the whole town had long since stopped being surprised that Joe Calder had a soft spot, and had started, slowly, to understand it had been there all along. For a long time I believed what a woman once told me, that being gentle made me weak, that being soft made me a pushover, that a strong woman would want a stronger man, and I'd never be strong enough. I had it exactly backward, and it took the strongest woman I ever met to teach me. Force never gentled a frightened thing in the history of the world. Every man who ever came at Joe Calder with strength, trying to break her or handle her or take what was hers, she scared off. And she was right to. The town called that a flaw in her. It was never a flaw, it was a filter. She was running off everyone who'd come to break her, and waiting, without much hope, for the one who'd come to earn her instead. I joked that she'd scare off every guy in town. She told me good. She only wanted one. What neither of us said out loud that day, but both of us knew by the end, is that her scaring them off and my being the one she didn't, those weren't 2 different things. They were the same thing. She scared off everyone who would have broken her, so that the one man soft enough to earn her could finally walk up, kneel down in the straw, and say the only words that ever reached her, "I'll follow your lead."